Hey everybody, my name is Arun Vardarajan. I'm a Principal Program Manager with the Microsoft 365 Groups team, and thanks for tuning into my video today. In today's session, we're going to be talking about Microsoft 365 Groups, start with a brief overview, and then deep dive into the architecture of the Groups platform. And in this session, you will get an understanding of the inner workings of the Groups platform. So let's get started. So this is the agenda for today's video. Like we said, we'll start with groups and then go to detailed overview. And the way we'll be doing it is we'll go through one scenario at a time. So we have four key flows identified, which is group creation, with the life cycle of a group, member management, and administration and policies. Let's start with an overview of the Microsoft 365 Groups platform. As you know, Groups platform powers a number of collaboration experiences across Microsoft 365, be it in Teams, SharePoint, Yammer, or Outlook. But in addition to just that, the Groups platform is also available in most of our productivity applications like Word, Excel that enable easy sharing. And they're also integrated with a number of third-party solutions in our partner ecosystem. And you see some logos there. The Groups platform is centrally stored and managed from the Azure AD Directory service. Now let's take a look at the Microsoft 365 Groups architecture. So this slide is very similar to the one that we saw previously, but this is designed to bring out the key architectural elements. Since the slide is a bit crowded, let me start explaining what are all the different components. First on the top is where we have all our user surfaces. So the first one is the admin surface. This includes commandlets, admin portals. Right next to that are the core hub apps like Yammer and Teams, which are closely tied and powered by the Groups platform. Right after is the productivity apps that we talked about earlier. So these are apps using which you can share content easily to a group of people. And on the top right, we have the third-party applications that integrate with our platform. So you can see that all these apps are tied to our platform using the Graph API layer. For simplification, I've just called it Graph API, but you can think of this as a unified API surface that allows all the applications to talk to the Groups platform. Now let's take a step deeper into the platform and understand what is beneath the API layer. Beneath the API layer, we have two key components. The first is the storage, where we store information about the group like the name, the group description, the membership, and so on. And for this, we leverage the Azure AD Directory service. A second key component of the Groups platform is the policy engine. And when we say policy engine, it means various policies like expiry, where you have the option to say, hey, I want to remove groups that are inactive for more than 180 days. So the definition of those policies is stored in a couple of places. It's stored in the security or the compliance center, as well as in the Azure Active Directory. And then the policy engine is something that basically runs periodically, reviews the policies, looks at all the groups in your platform, and then makes sure that all these groups remain compliant. So now let's take a look at one scenario at a time on how these different architectural elements come together. So first off, let's talk about group creation. So as most of you will be familiar, Groups platform powers the three key communication apps, which is Outlook, Teams, and Yammer. One of the things we do know that is when you create a group in Outlook, it is automatically not visible in Teams and Yammer. Similarly, when a group is created in Teams, we don't make it automatically visible in Outlook and Yammer. And there's a couple of reasons we do this. This is because most often users prefer to be in a single communication platform. So we start with one and then optionally allow people to expand into the other platform. So let's look at maybe an example of how you can go about enabling that. First, let's assume that you've created a group in Outlook. Your team has been using the email surface, and now you want to adopt Teams and you want to use chat as well for your communication. This is sort of a common scenario where some of the project teams use email for their external communication for maybe other teams or customers to connect with them, while they use Teams chat for more of an internal communication tool. The enablement process is very simple. You go to the Teams, you say you want to create a new team, which is the first screen on the left. Right after that, you have the option of picking, hey, I can create from something that already exists. So the two options are you can clone from an existing team or start with a group. So here you would pick group as the next option. After that, you see a screen that shows you all the available groups. So here you can go ahead and pick the group that you want, and that's pretty much it. So now once you click OK, a new team is provisioned for you, and the team is ready to go. And it's connected to the original Outlook group, which means all the membership and everything is maintained in sync. A similar flow that we see is when people start in teams. So you start a team, maybe you have this internal collaboration project going on, and then you realize that you need to have some external collaboration. You want to make your team accessible to other groups within your own company, like departments or even your customers. So this is where opening up the team for Outlook is very useful. So this is sort of the other flow where now you start with a team and then you say, hey, make my team available in Outlook. So the first option that you have, the first action that we want you to do is run this PowerShell commandlet, which is set unified group, where you pick the identity, just the group name, and then you set it as don't hide it from address lists. What this does is now this group is visible across your entire company, so people can start emailing it very easily. The second one is actually making this group visible in the Outlook left nav for all your group members. So this is very similar. You say set unified group, identity as group name, and then you say don't hide it from all the Exchange clients. Now this group is visible in all the Outlook clients. So now let's go back and talk about the visibility problem, right? So we said, hey, when you create a new team, we want the team to be provisioned. We want the team to be visible. We don't want it visible in Yammer, and we don't want to visible it in Outlook. So how does that flow happen from an architectural standpoint? Before we go into the flow, there's a couple of key architectural elements that I want to mention. The first one is the data store. So that we talked about how Azure AD is the primary data store. The second one is the notification framework, which is how are all the apps connected to Azure AD and how do they get notified when something changes, like a new group getting created. And the third one is a key element called resource provisioning options. So what basically it defines is for any new group that is being created, you have the option to define what are all the resources you want provisioned for this group. So with these in mind, let's take a look at the create group experience. So let's assume we have a user who's gone ahead and said they want to create a team. So you see that the create team notification is now being sent to the Azure AD directory service. Next, the Azure AD service publishes a reliable notification to all the apps. And the reason we call it a reliable notification is because, as you know, the Microsoft service is available in numerous data centers across hundreds and thousands of customers with millions of users in it. The word reliable just means that our system is designed to be fault tolerant. So these notifications never get lost. Now you can see that the notification has been published and the different apps have received that notification. Now let's see what happens. Now, based on resource provisioning options, we know that we need to provision a stream, we need to provision a SharePoint site, we need to provision a team, and we need to provision a planner. Similarly, you see that Yammer and Contact Manager are not deployed because we know that those are not needed. And here you see that the Outlook is sort of in a dashed or dotted line. So what this really means is a mailbox is provisioned, and this mailbox provides for services like e-discovery, compliance, and calendar for the team, but it is disabled by default or hidden by default. So that's why it's dotted. So if you were to go back and run those commandlets to expose these in Outlook, then you can start to make this visible as well. So this is one of the most basic and fundamental elements of the Groups platform, which is the Azure ADX data store, and the notifications is a mechanism for keeping all the apps in sync. Next, let's move on and talk about what are all the different policies that are applied when a group is being created. So like we saw earlier in the architecture diagram, we have the data store and the policy engine. There are 3 policies that are taken into account every time a group is created. The first one is the creation policy. The creation policy basically defines who in my company is allowed to create a group. By default, all users are allowed to create groups, but admins have the option of limiting that. So every time a new group is created, our platform is going to check whether that user actually has the permission to create the group. And these checks happen both on the UI layer as well as our backend. The second key policy that applies when a new group is created is the naming policy. So a quick refresher, a naming policy allows admins to define prefix and suffix so that every group that's created from the finance department has a prefix, say finance. So that helps distinguish. The second one aspect of the naming policy is the blocked words. For example, you want to make sure that some inappropriate words are never used, even accidentally, by your employees. So you could use a naming policy to define those. So the way the naming policy works is every time a group is created, at the time of creation, we evaluate the user submitted group name against the policy, and we allow the group creation only if it is allowed. Similar to naming policy, a couple of other checks we do is we always make sure that the email address of a group is always unique. Similarly, the site URL is always unique. This is sort of a basic thing, and these are checks that are always done. The third set of policies we apply at the time of group creation is the new Microsoft IP labels. So as you might be familiar, this was in preview in last year, and a few months back, we recently GA'd this feature. Microsoft IP labels just provides a very easy way for admins to sort of define templates so that their end users don't have to think about how to classify content or how to configure the group. As you can imagine, there's two key configurations in a group, which is public, private, which is the privacy setting, or internal, external, which is the guest setting. So in order to make it easy for end users, admins can define policies to say, hey, this is confidential or this is external facing. And just by picking those labels, the privacy setting and the guest setting are automatically applied. Most of our UI surfaces actually enforce this, so this never becomes an error, but this is something we enforce at the platform layer. So even when you create a group using our APIs, and if you were to provide a label that were to mismatch with the defined settings, then the group creation would fail. And that's the architectural component of policies that create time. And next, let's look at data residency. So as you're aware, Office is available in multiple geos now, especially Exchange and SharePoint Online. And in order to capture which geo the group needs to be created in or be homed in, we have a property called preferred data location or PDL. So on the screen, you can see that I have an example of how the PDL can be specified at the time of group creation. So in this example, we are creating a new group called multi-geo EUR, and we explicitly pass in the mailbox region as Europe. And what this does is it allows you as an admin to be able to create a group at a desired data residency. In order to make things simple, what we do by default is we inherit the PDL of the creator. So for example, if the user is based in Europe, any group they create is automatically homed in Europe, for example. But you do have the option of changing the preferred data location of the user or of the group using these commands. Once a group has been created in one data residency, there's often a requirement for you to move it. It could be that maybe have some of your users are changing locations, or you want to move some specific data because now you've started adopting the multiple data residency options. So the way to trigger these data residency moves is twofold. First is for Exchange. All you have to do is update the data residency of the user, and the cross-geo move happens automatically. So it's sort of provisioned and it's managed by our own service. On the SharePoint side, we don't yet do it automatically. So in order to trigger the move, you would have to run a command. So the command example is on the screen. So you just say you want to start the SPO site move, and then you call this out. And once the command is run, the destination is defined and the data starts to get moved. Not all the M365 apps support moves yet, but that is something that we are working towards. Now let's take a look at the group's lifecycle. As you can imagine, all groups start with a new state when the user creates them. And as the group starts to get activity, we put it in what is called the active state. Depending on whether your company has enabled expiry policy, we keep tracking the group to see if the group is actually active or not. If the group is not active, then we automatically trigger a deletion process and it gets moved to a soft deleted state. In cases where the expiry policy is not involved, a user, as you know, can manually go in and choose to delete a group or delete a team because they no longer need it. Once a group is soft deleted, it is available for 30 days before it gets hard deleted. So anytime a user clicks a restore within those 30 days, the group comes back with all the attached resources and it's almost like it never got deleted. But if the delete is not restored within 30 days, then the group goes into a hard delete state, which means the entry of the group is completely removed from the directory and also all the associated data is removed. The only exception where we don't remove the data is when retention is applied. Now that we've gone through the group's life cycle at a high level, let's dive in and look at exactly how this works out. Let's start by looking at group activity tracking and auto renewal. So let's assume that there's a user who belongs to a group in tenant T1, and this user is using the group across Outlook, SharePoint, and Teams. So every time any of the users in the group are using this group, either in Outlook or in SharePoint or in Teams, their activity data is continuously tracked. And what we do is we look at next the tenant policies. Let us assume that the tenant has defined a policy of 90 days. Now we look at groups that are due for expiry in the next 90 days, and then we look to see whether this group has been active or not. So the activity tracking system tells us whether the group has been active or not in the last 90 days. And if the group was actually active, then we go ahead and auto renew the group, which means the renewal date is now pushed by another 90 days. But if the group is actually not active, what we do is we mark the group for deletion. We don't delete the group at that point. The group is marked for deletion, and that now gets picked up by the expiry emailing service. What the expiry emailing service does is it looks at the list of groups that are up for expiry, and then it sends 3 notifications to the owners of the groups, one 30 days prior, one 7 days prior, and one 1 day prior. And these are just options available to the end user to be able to say, do they want to let the group expire or do they want to manually renew it? And when the user chooses to manually renew it, they are taken to the Azure AD portal where they have the option to say click renew, and now it's manually renewed for another 90 days. Again, the 90 days is a configurable option that you can define for your own tenant. It could be any date more than 30 days. Now let's take a little bit deeper look into the activity tracking service. So the activity tracking service today is enabled at the tenant level. So you have the option to say, hey, I want to do auto renewal for my whole tenant. Secondly, the activity tracking service looks for activities only in 3 apps, which is Teams, SharePoint, and Outlook. For example, if you have a Yammer community that is being actively used and you're uploading files, because there's SharePoint usage, the Yammer community is going to get auto-renewed. But if that Yammer community is not seeing a lot of file usage, then that today is not a part of the activity tracking service. And this is again, just a point in time. We do plan to enhance this in the coming year. The second thing we want to call out is that not all activities are considered for auto renewal. And we try to make sure that only intentional activities get counted. Often we run into a situation where you get a message saying, hey, this site is inactive. You go to the site and inadvertently auto renew it. So we don't want that to happen. So for SharePoint, we look at explicit activities to say somebody read the file or somebody edited the file or somebody actually sent an email for Outlook scenarios. And only in those scenarios do we auto renew. In Teams, it's not very easy for us to distinguish between intentional activities. So right now we have a bias for retaining the data versus deleting it. So any user actively even reading messages on the Teams channel prevents the channel from getting deleted. Next, let's look at the deletion flow. So in the next few slides, we'll just walk through step by step what happens in the process of deletion. Let's start with a group that is active in Azure AD, and the group has 4 resources attached to it: Exchange, Teams, SharePoint, and Planner. First, let's assume that the group is active in Planner, but at some point in time, the user decides that they no longer want this group. Maybe their project is over and they want to get rid of the group. So the user goes and deletes the group in Planner. So the first thing that happens is there's a notification that goes from Planner to Azure AD, informing Azure AD that the group now needs to be deleted. This request is accepted and the group is deleted in Azure AD. And after that confirmation, Planner deletes its own copy of the group. but the data is still only soft deleted for 30 days. The reliable notification gets published to all the other apps, and all the other apps also follow suit, and the data is marked as soft deleted. So here let's take a look at a few differences. For example, first in Teams, the group is soft deleted for 30 days, no other change. On the Outlook side, the group gets deleted for 30 days, but the email address actually gets released. This is because if someone else needs this email address, they can immediately use it. On the SharePoint side, this is slightly different. We actually have a longer time window for soft deletion, which is actually 93 days. If you look at it, it's a little more than 3 months. And the site URL is also not deleted. The site URL is maintained. We do recognize that there is a lack of coherence here across the apps, and we are working towards fixing that. So now let's assume that the user realizes 15 days down the line that this group that they deleted, they need it back. Users have two options. They can request you as the admin to say help you recover the group, or they can actually recover the group on their own. So we've newly rolled out a capability called Groups Hub in the Outlook web experience. We would encourage you to educate your end users about it because this is completely self-service. So they can go to the Outlook web experience, open the People and Groups tab, and right there they can see a list of deleted groups where they can restore it in one click. Now let's assume that the user goes and restores the group in the Outlook web experience. Next, what happens is the group is marked as restored in Azure AD. So that is the first step. And after that, the reliable notification goes to all the endpoints. And now all the content is perfectly restored. Here again, the one small caveat is that on the Outlook side, in case somebody else took the email address of the group, then the restore is not going to work. But in most cases, the email address is going to be available, so the group is going to get restored flawlessly. Now let's look at a case where the group actually has to get hard deleted. So let's start with the base case. The group has been deleted by the owner, and the content is retained for 30 days in the soft deletion window. On the 31st day, our system realizes that this group has been deleted for more than 30 days. So we send out a hard delete notification to all the apps, and the group is also deleted from Azure AD. Now you can see that the group has been deleted in all the apps, but the content is still available in SharePoint for 93 days. This is similar to what we talked about in the previous slide. And now let's assume that the 94th day comes. So at this point, the group has been hard deleted in all the apps, and all the content, including the site content, is now permanently deleted. The next scenario we want to talk about is retention. So in case of retention, the admin can go and define the retention policy in the Compliance Center. A common pattern is to have a 7-year retention policy for financial industries. So let's assume that, in this example, we have a deleted group. The group is still in a soft deleted state, and the policy is set for 7 years. Now on the 31st day, as expected, the group is hard deleted. The hard delete notification is now sent to all the apps. Since Planner does not support retention policy yet, you will see that the group is hard deleted and all the content in Planner is removed. But in Exchange, Teams, and SharePoint, the group actually is not deleted. Even though the delete notification comes in, because of the retention policy, we don't honor that and instead keep the data. And this data is now accessible both via eDiscovery as well as the management surface endpoints. So in the first two sections, we saw an overview of how groups are created and what is the life cycle of a group. Now in the third section, let's talk about member management. When we talk about member management, the first experience a user has is discovering and joining groups. So here, let's take a look at what is the experience when the user tries to join a group. Let's assume you're in Teams and you click on the Join or Create Team option. If you're a user who does not have creation policy, then you can see that you only get the Join Groups option. If you do have creation policy, then you have the option of both creating a new team as well as joining an existing one. Secondly, when you try to join a group, what we do is we basically run a discovery service in our backend that looks at all the groups, it looks at membership, it looks at usage, and it also looks at what are all the groups you're not a member of, and then it does a recommendation. So this is one other element of the groups platform which powers the search and discovery experience. So let's walk through the different member edition experiences. We'll start with the most simple and basic one, which is there's a public group, and I, as a member of the company, now choose to go join that group. Or it could be a private group where I, as an owner, want to explicitly add someone who needs to be a part of this group. The flow is very simple. You can start in any of the apps. You go and make a request to say add a group, add member to a group. So the first thing that happens is we send a notification to Azure AD to say member M1 needs to be a part of this group, and that is honored. Right after the member addition happens, the next thing that happens is an email flow is triggered. So depending on the app, you get an app specific welcome email, and this helps the admin, sort of quickly ramp up and educate the user. This welcome email again is optional. So one thing we do want to call out is admins have the option of disabling the welcome email for any group. So any new members who get added will not get the welcome email. This can be useful when you want to bulk add members, get the group to a ready state before you open it up for all your users. So now let's look at the next scenario where we add a user to a private group. The use case here is fairly straightforward. You might be a member of a group, and then you realize that maybe some of your colleagues would benefit from being a part of this group. So you go ahead and add them to the group. Because it is a private group, they actually need owner approval to join, and they don't get added immediately. So here you can see that the flow is very similar. You start in an app, you make the add request, but right after that, it doesn't go to the Azure AD service. The member is actually recorded as a pending member on the group in the group's platform, and we trigger an email flow where a request is submitted to the owner. The owner now has the option to either accept or decline it, and this has been built using the actionable email framework, meaning the owner can look at the email and basically click a button directly on the email to approve or decline, and just in one click, get their job done. And after that, let's say the approval does go through, the flow is similar to the previous slide, where the user gets added to Azure AD, and they do get sent a welcome email, which is optional and can be disabled by admins. Now that we've seen how we can add, members to private and public groups, the next sort of membership that we do want to talk about is guest members. Guest members are basically users who are not a part of your own tenant, and these are people but you need to work with on, for solving your business scenarios. These could be partners, these could be suppliers, these could be vendors, these could be your customers. And the guest platform on groups is actually quite rich, and we see the number of users increasing by an order of magnitude every year. So from an architectural standpoint, what is the first step we consider when a guest is about to join a tenant is the tenant level policies. So there's policies that define eligible domain, meaning which are the domains or companies from which this guest is invited or can be invited. Second is the group level policies. So as an admin, you can define which groups can have external members and which groups cannot have external members. And this can be useful, for example, maybe on marketing, you're okay with your marketing team working with different agencies, but maybe you don't want your research department to be working with external folks. So you can do these group level config options. The third one is the inviter role, meaning who in your company is even allowed to invite guests. This is just one more way of locking down guest access. So from a flow standpoint, every time a user tries to add a guest, all these checks are enforced in all our apps and backend. And this is the first check that happens. Now let's assume that the guest is already present in the tenant. If the guest is already available in the tenant, then the add to Azure AD request, is basically say, take this guest and add him to the group, which is automatically approved. And after that, an email is sent. So this flow is fairly simple. It's like adding a member who already exists. The next flow, which is slightly more complicated, is let's assume that this guest is new to our tenant, right? So let's say I want to invite somebody from contoso.com. My company has set up contoso.com as an eligible domain. And now I add, say, John from contoso.com to my group. Azure AD is going to sort of take in this request, but the user is marked in sort of a pending state, where the user now gets an invitation to participate in my company. So within his Contoso email, the user is going to get a request to say that Arun has invited you to participate, and the user now has to redeem that invitation. So they have to click OK and be willing to share their data and say that they are eager to participate in this group. And once they have given their approval to participate, they are added to the group and then they receive the welcome email. A common question that we get from many of our customers is, hey, many of my users add external guests to their groups because they have a use case at that point in time. But maybe after some time, those guests no longer need to be a part of my tenant. So to solve that scenario, we have introduced a feature called membership reviews or access reviews. The way it works is on a periodic basis, you as an admin can trigger this flow where the owners of individual groups now have to say whether each of their guests is needed or not. And you can even enforce strict policies today to say that if somebody does not explicitly give their approval, automatically remove the guest. The way the access service works is very similar. So we go through the same flow where the user is added, but now after the user is added, the access service runs periodically, picks all the groups, looks for groups with external members, and then now sends a notification to the owner. So we have covered the three main sections, which is group creation, group lifecycle, and membership management. So now let's talk about the fourth section, which is administrative policies. So we did talk about the fact that we have different sets of policies, like say creation policy, expiry policy, naming policy. In this slide, we cover where are these policies created and how can you as an admin access these policies and how do they interact with the group's platform. So we have mainly divided this slide into two components. First is what we call as app-specific policies, and second is what we call as suite-wide policies. When we talk about app-specific policies, there might be policies that might apply only to Outlook groups. For example, things like who is allowed to email this group? Are external people allowed to email this group or not? Or there might be SharePoint specific policies where you say, hey, this group can be accessed only from certain devices and not from other devices. Or team specific policies where you say, hey, maybe this team is a sort of a broadcast channel where only messages can be posted and not replied. All these policies are actually defined by the individual apps. So for email policies, you'll do it in the Exchange Admin Center, for chat policies in Teams and so on. These are just examples. As you know, there's over 20 apps on the group's platform like Yammer, Planner. We don't have those examples listed here. The second set of policies that we apply, mainly from the group's platform, are what we call as suite-wide policies. So these are options that are available across all the apps that are powered by groups. And these policies are mainly defined in three portals. The primary one is the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. The second one is the Azure AD portal. And the third one is the security and the compliance admin centers. So here you can see that some of the options like being able to look at all the groups, being able to restore deleted groups, those would be in the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. And going forward, that is going to be one of the primary endpoints for you to manage all your groups. Secondly, we do have some directory related policies and audit logs available in the Azure AD portal. And for all the compliance features, like say the IP label or the retention policies we talked about, you can define it in the compliance and security admin centers. So now let's go back and take a look at the architecture diagram we looked at initially and do a quick recap. So as we saw, all of the group operations, like say creation or membership management or policies, all of them flow through the Graph API. All the surfaces are connected to our backend through this API platform. And below the platform, we have these various policy engines that are working on all the groups stored in our Azure AD service. One of the things that we do want to point out is that while groups are available for work, we have also made a lot of progress in making the same groups available for even personal scenarios, like for example, using it with friends and family. We have a great session coming up by my colleagues Sandra and Rahul. The details are listed, so we do encourage you to go watch that video to learn more. So let's take a quick look at all the videos that we have for you. So here is a list of all the videos that we think you'll find useful as admins. And the group specific videos are starred. Here you can see that the video we just talked about, which is managing groups for work and life, is also available. And we also have a very interesting session on how Microsoft internally manages groups to make our employees productive. Thank you all for joining me today. I hope you found this video useful, and we want to leave you with our key resources. We have links to the tech community, the user voice, and the roadmap here. We are grateful for your feedback all the time, so please do keep that feedback coming. Thank you.